So now let's move on to the next session. The next session is titled Live Animations with Flutter, and it will be presented by Parth. Please give a big round of applause. Welcome Parth.
Yeah, thank you everyone. My name is Parth Joshi, and on social media I go by the name Rotten Kiwi, a single T in there, right? I really love this country, so I'll give a short introduction of myself in Japanese as well. Minasan hajimemashita, Parth Joshi desu, Indo kara kimashita. Flutter freelancer desu. That's all I prepared. Okay. Yeah, I hope that was right. So we'll begin with the presentation. That's Rive animation with Flutter. Right? So what do animations mean in general? That a diagram that you have or an asset that you have on your screen or in your project that changes its state, right? So in general, animations come from a predefined state which follow their own rules, right? So you cannot interact with animations as such is our general approach towards animations. But what happens within Rive is that you can create interactive animations. So what are interactive animations? Animations that would start based upon some input from the user side. Different input may result in a different animation scheme, right? So all of these aspects, like the animation moving forward in its state, depending on your input, would be called an interactive animation, right? So the current design tools, as I said, are still stuck in the old media format. PNG, even the video is like just frames of photos, right? So moving a step forward, Rive came up with a .riv format, their own format, which gives you an interactive animation. So Rive is blazing fast, right? One would believe that if you have an interactive animation, the speed would be slow, like the response time would be slow. That's not the case. It's so fast that you could almost mistake it to be a normal animation. The next best thing is it's very tiny in size. A proper scaled up animation in itself will rarely exceed the mark of 1 MB. Right? Majority animations that Rive produces, it comes down around 50 to 200 KB in file size, right? That's like quite tiny based on what it actually does. And Rive is made for runtime. So Rive animations are not limited to any platform. They can run on web, they can run on your native Android, Flutter, iOS, almost every platform supports Rive, and Rive supports almost every platform. So the button animation that's on the slide, right? Even that's made in Rive. That's a Rive animation. And how it works is, let's say this is a button on your web page or in your Flutter application. You have the press animation when you click the button, right? Now, if we were to code this animation, it would take, let's say, half an hour, 1 hour maybe. And it would also be like a decent size, right? But why not just use a Rive animation file instead? That would clean up the code quite a lot, make it readable, and you could organize it in your assets folder. So, animation for your product. In this day and age, animation is no longer just an eye candy for your product. Right? Animation is not something that you would just use to attract people. What all animation can do for your product is it could act as a guide to your application, right? So a major concern, a major problem that various of applications and the users face is that sometimes it could get a bit confusing. The routing on the application could get a bit confusing for the users, right? So if you have an interactive animation that guides them across the app the first time they are running it, that would be a very good UX practice, right? It adds a delight to the user. It adds a delight to the user experience, and you could get like the user feedback, the consumer feedback. All of that can also be done using animation. It, it gives out a pleasant feeling, all in all. And animations in general are an integral part of gamification. Gamification is being adopted at a rapid rate in various applications or products that target masses. So any animation, avatars, mascot animation in gamification will create a sense of similarity or a sense of ownership to that app, and the users tend to stay longer when that's the case. So even this animation is made in Rive. So what happens in this is when you click on the tree, the birds pop up. When you click back, the birds go in. Now that's an interactive animation, right? And the entire file size, I guess, of this animation is 18 KB, if I remember right. So you could realize how insignificant that size is when it comes down to your product. Now, community, right? Whenever we're learning something new, we need a proper community for that. Like it helps us out the process. So the Rive community is bustling with animations. There are many different projects that people are putting up for free for you to take a look at, use in your products, etc. I myself use quite a couple of animations. Like I pick them up from the community of Rive. Then there's proper well-maintained documents as well on the Rive website that shows how you can integrate those Rive animations into various other platforms. And there's a forum. So it's similar to your GitHub issues UI. So you could put up a question over there. The developer, like the Rive animators, would answer you. And there's multiple topics going around in the forums. It's a general forum. So there's a real good Rive community support to Rive as well. So learning it won't be like as difficult as compared to the other tools. Now, when we open up the Rive engine, right? This is what we come across. So basically, this is where a Rive animation is created. Now, there are certain important aspects to this. So the first one being the toolbar. The toolbar is the topmost bar over here, and it contains all the display tools available, right? Point selection, marker, then maybe a cursor, etc. All of that is available over there. The second important thing is the hierarchy. Now, what happens within animations is you could nest certain objects in an animation, right? So let's say the dragon over here is flying and its mouth opens up, right? So the mouth opening should be in sync with the dragon moving. So how would you visualize that? That the dragon in entirety is moving up and down, and the mouth opens as an individual animation set, right? So these two animations are nested together, and that is possible by using the hierarchy that Rive provides. Now, next is the inspector on the right side. That panel, as a general inspector, it allows you to change the color, size, rotation, and other physical aspects of the animation. Now, another important thing is the stage. So this entire center part is the stage. Okay, on stage you can have your animation components. Stage is not the place where animations happen. Stage is your project space, right? The entire animation space. So on the stage there's a thing called artboard. Now this square is the artboard. Artboard is what will be displayed when you use the Rive animation on Flutter products, on Flutter applications, right? So if I were to, if I were to pull this dragon out and put up over here, right, and then import this application on the Flutter project, it would not show on the Flutter application, right? So artboard is what is being displayed on your project, and the stage is your entire canvas where you could make animations. The next is the timeline. So this is not the timeline. There's another panel in the timeline. The timeline is similar to what you see while video editing, right? So the timeline defines when an animation should start, where it should start at, etc. Right? So there could be concurrent animations. So let's say the mouth of the dragon opens, and after it opens, there's a fire animation. So to set up that sequence, you use the timeline function. The most interesting and the most unique part of Rive animation would be the state machine. This is the state machine diagram. So over here you could see entry, then there's an idle panel, right? So what does idle mean? Idle is a state of the animation. So in idle state, the dragon will only be bobbing up and down, and its wings would be doing a flying animation, right? Now, there would be another trigger in this case, right? There would be another arrow. It would say on tap, right? What would happen on tap? The dragon would open its mouth and fire would blow out, right? So that's a trigger which is set up in your state machine, and this makes the animation interactive, right? And again, this entire animation comes down to around 20 to 30 kbs in file size. So this is what your Rive engine looks like. So let's talk about state machines, right? State machines define the logic that runs your transitions, right? So think of it in a way that you are putting your animation logic in the animation itself. There's not a single line of code, right? You just have to set up the workflow, the animation flow. Interactive animations, right? There are various inputs to the animation. It could be a trigger, it could be a Boolean value, right? And depending upon those inputs, the animation changes. Easier collaboration between designers and developers, right? So usually what happens is the designers build up something crazy, the developers are not able to develop it, and then there's clashes, right? Sparks flying around everywhere. So why not just have designers make the design as they want, and the developers would include it in the project straight up, right? That saves like lots of time, and that gives out the exact product that the designers have created, right? And the best part is you can, or the designer can, iterate the designs without needing to depend on the developer, right? So as I mentioned, there's not a single line of code into making this animation, right? So let's say we were to remove Jigglypuff and have Pichu instead, right? So you don't need to contact the developer that I'm changing the Pokemon, right? You need to change the codes and all. You could do it yourself and just send them the Rive file, or just put the Rive file on network, and the developer could use it straight up, right? That saves like lots of time, efforts, and reduces clashes between developers and designers. So again, this is also an interactive animation. As you can see, there's a mouse hovering over. When you click, Jigglypuff bounces off, right? So that is an interactive animation of sorts, not a single line of code, once again. And this is a single digit KB file, honestly, if I remember right. So coming back to state machines, the logic of state machine, right? So over here you can see its inputs, okay? So there are three types of inputs that state machine in Rive supports as of now. That is a trigger, a Boolean, and a number, okay? So we'll go through them later on the slides, like it's the next part. But a trigger is something, as it says, which will trigger the animation. A change in your input will result in a different animation, right? That is what the triggers are. Then there's a part called listener. So what does listener mean? The area on your artboard, or the area of of the animation wherein you could put the input, right? Not so only when you click the Snorlax in the previous slide, right? Only when you click the Snorlax on the previous slide should Jigglypuff jump. So in this case, the listener is the Snorlax object, right? Clicking anywhere else won't result in the Jigglypuff jumping. So that is the listener of your animation. And then the logic that showcases what it is supposed to do, right? So where you could see there's a state called jump. So when you click on Snorlax, the jump state is called and the Jigglypuff jumps, right? So coming to input types, so there's a Boolean input. So what happens, if it's true, there would be a certain state. If it's false, there would be a certain state. And you see these arrows over here, right? So this part is the animation, right? So in between changing the states, there's an animation happening. And that animation is like the toggling of the button, right? So whenever the state changes, the animation is called and subsequent actions are taken. So this is the Boolean input, right? This is the numeric input. So this is 0 and the input goes till 100. You could see this is a unique example of, you could say, a loading bar. So imagine a loading bar that goes from 0% to 100% complete. Now that animation you could make with Rive. You could, go crazy with ideas. In this case, it's a column in the aquarium. You could have something else, circular loader, let's say, of sorts, and all of that in like under 10 KB of file size, and interactive as well. So that reduces like almost 60 lines of code in your project. 60 lines of code which won't be touched ever again unless there's like UI updates. So this is the numeric input, and the last is the trigger input. So what is a trigger input? Trigger input is just like Boolean, but what happens is when you activate it, the false value becomes true for a very small time, right? So that's basically a trigger. So in this case, what happens is when I click, the false value becomes true, the Jigglypuff jumps, and even before the Jigglypuff lands, the value becomes false again. So that, it acts like a trigger. So that's a trigger input. So these are the 3 types of inputs in Rive animation, and you could use them simultaneously. So if you look at this example, right? So clicking on the button will activate it, right? So that's a Boolean input. So if it's activated, the indicator on the button turns blue, and if it's not, it goes black, right? The external semicircular loader, that's a numeric input, right? So it goes from 0 to 100, and depending upon the value, the color range increases. And the last is the trigger input. So whenever you click the button, a trigger is called and a sound animation is played. So a sound is played. So the sound's not on this one right now, but yeah, it's there. So in this way, you could use all the 3 types of input in a single animation, right? Now, enough with making the animation, that's the designer's part. But understanding how it's made is crucial when we are coming to using that in our Flutter projects, right? So, Rive with Flutter, the first thing, as usual, you have to use the Rive package. Now, everyone has their own method of adding the Rive package, so like whichever method you're comfortable with. So you could directly go to pubsec.yaml, add in the Rive file name, or you could just Flutter pub, use pub to add the package, right? So what happens within the Rive package is there's a Rive animation class, okay? And the Rive animation class has a Rive animation widget. Now, this is a high-level widget. Okay, it's not a lower-level widget, size box or something. This is a high-level widget, and this widget allows you to play the animations from your mentioned Rive files, right? So, how could you get the Rive files in your project? There are multiple ways. So, first of all, would be via URL. The Rive file is hosted somewhere, right? And the link to that file is mentioned on your widget. So one of the basic advantages of using riveanimation.network is that you could change animations on the go. So let's say my application is online, it's on production, and I need to change the animation of a certain interaction, right? I don't have to make changes in the code. I could go over to the Rive file, make those animation changes, and it would be reflected on the application. The next is via asset bundle. Download the Rive animation in its format. So let's say vehicles.riv. Add it to the assets folder, add it to the pubspec.file, and then use it as an Rive animation.asset. And the last part is something which we need to use if we are caching the animation. So let's say it's a loader animation, a loading animation, and it is supposed to be used in the product like multiple times, right? 6, 7 more, or maybe more. So it would be a really good practice to cache it. So you do not, initialize it or like load it every other time. So just cache it via Rive file.direct. Right? That is the caching of animation. There's another constructor to the Rive animation widget, and that is file. So what it does is you can, it's not, the Rive animation is not in your Flutter project, it's somewhere else, and you need to call it. So you use Rive animation.file and the file path to it. But it's rarely used, so I did not mention over here. Now, caching a Rive file, as I said, you need to load the Rive animation you load it into a variable, and then using Rive animation.direct, you call the file. This saves up like loads of memory on the long run, of course. Then animation playback. So this is where the interactive part comes in, right? So again, as I mentioned, the artboard is where the animation happens. Artboard is what is displayed on your project, right? In a Rive animation project, on the stage, you can have multiple artboards. You can have 10 different, 15 different artboards, but only one artboard can be active at a time. So how do you define which artboard to use? Using the artboard property of the Rive animation widget. Right? So using this, you could define which artboard you want to use. Again, controlling the playback, simply make a Rive animation controller. Like that's the best practice to follow when we are making Flutter projects. Make a Rive animation controller and use that controller to play, pause, or stop the animation. And another interesting part in this case is the callback function. So when you're using a Rive animation controller, it also gives you callback properties on start and on stop, right? So you could have different stuff running in your in the business logic using on start and on stop. So let's say there's a loader animation, right? So on start of the loading, start fetching some data, right? And on, like, whenever the data is over, you could run the on stop function, or on stop you could move on to the next page, right? So the callback functions help out making the interactive animations fit into your project and work accordingly to your business logic. Next is handling inputs in the state machines, right? So as we saw, state machines, they have 3 types of inputs, right? Trigger, Boolean, and numerical. So first of all, you need to define which state machine the animation will be using. Again, a Rive animation could have multiple state machines, right? Depending upon what the animation is supposed to do, a state machine will change. Now, in this state machine, so in this example, we are giving out a Boolean, we are giving out a trigger input, right? So as you can see over here, SMI trigger. Now, whenever you're giving an input, the variable type is an SMI input. Okay, so SMI should stand for state machine, right? State machine input. So on Rive initialization, on Rive init, so what this does is, when your Rive animation is initialized, you give the controller an Boolean input of trigger, because as I mentioned, trigger in itself is a Boolean, right? That becomes true for a very short time. So what you do is you get the controller, you find the input of boolean, then you put in the name of the input, right? The same name in your Rive animation file. So in this case, it's bump. So the Rive animation of, let's take the example of Snorlax, right? And instead of bump, there's jump over there. So the name for the jump, like the input would be jump. And so all I have to do is controller.find input, boolean data type, jump as my defined variable. So we'll quickly go over the use cases. Duolingo uses Rive animation in the entirety of its application, right? Every character is animated on the Rive, and you could see how interactive it is. So if you have used Duolingo, you would understand that there's a different emotion to the animation to the mascot for different actions. That is possible because you're using the Rive animations. The homepage of Figma uses Rive animation as mentioned by one of the members. Again, this is a static animation. This is not an interactive animation, but yes, they use it. Now, why Rive animations? There are lots of possibilities right now, and people are starting to realize how efficient or how beautiful this is. The first one being using Rive animations to build onboarding screens, right? You could have interactive onboarding screens, semi-interactive onboarding screens. Let's say you have a 3D structure over here, and you could, scroll through it, rotate it in 360 degrees. You could have that animation built in Rive, so that's zero code on your project, and put it up on onboarding screen, right? So that's like saving so many lines of codes and multiple project files as well. Next is, so this was like very popular, I guess about a year ago. So this is an interactive login screen. So what happens is whenever you're putting in the password, the teddy closes his eyes. If you have put in a wrong password, he becomes sad. If you put in a correct password, he becomes happy, right? So this is what makes your application stand out, makes your project stand out, right? Something the user will remember. And that is like very easy when it comes down to animations, especially Rive animations. Next is pull to refresh animations. This is, I have rarely seen this stuff of happening on like live production projects, but yeah, I have used this myself in a personal project of mine, and it's very satisfying to pull to refresh. So mostly I end up just pulling down to see the animation. Again, it increases the API calls and whatnot, but yeah, it's fun. And the next is micro animations in our application. So icons in your projects could, in this case, they pop open and all. So there could be other cases as well. So a menu button or a floating button at the bottom right side, when you click it, when you press it, it pops open into 6 different buttons. Like it bursts out into 6 different buttons. When you close it, they combine together. This could be an example of using an interactive animation. So that's it for this session. As I mentioned, I go across the social handles using the name Rotten Kiwi, a single T, right? Thank you. So thank you for being such good listeners. Arigato gozaimashita.
Thank you, Parth, for the enlightening presentation. We now have time for some questions for a few minutes. So if you have any question, a staff member will take your microphone.
Is output a JSON file or it's something? Hey, I'm going one thing.
Yeah. No, it's a .riv file. It kind of uses the SVG format. It's similar to the SVG format of sorts, but I mean, I don't think it uses a JSON at the end.
Okay, it's XML. Yeah. SVG is similar like the XML.
Yeah, it's their own format, .riv file. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Jika.
Hi, I have one question. Is
when you want to create Rive animation, you must use the Rive platform. Is
Yeah.
possible to use After Effects, and there is some
So,
extension to.
Yeah,
export.
you could use After Effects, make your basic structure of the character or whatever you have, and then import it into Rive editor. They have that feature of importing another file from a different product into their engine.
Okay. Usually, like before, I use Lottie file to add some animation, and I realize sometimes when I create custom Lottie file, something not available on their website.
Yeah.
It's take a long time to load inside the app. Even
That's not the
during
case in
production.
this one. That's not happening here. It's
In
blazing
Rive,
fast.
even if you create something too much customized and you involve a lot of items.
I'll show you an example. It's a very popular example on the community. Like the time's over, so we'll have that discussion over there. But it's a very complex animation. Too many things in the animation, and it's blazing fast. Like it takes like maybe a second to load on the project.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions? Any more questions?
Thank you for speaking.
Hi.
Can we include dynamic text? I mean,
Yes.
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 Thank you.
So they
Because
have.
I want to change. I want to support Japanese and English.
Yeah. So they have a text support as well for their animations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All fine. So thank you very much for insightful presentation and Q&A session. Let's give a round of applause for Parth again. So we will now take lunch break until 1:30. So following the staff instructions, please take your lunch box to the aisle, to the park. And yeah, so and also during the lunch session, Ask the Speaker corner is available. So if you want, bring your lunchbox to the Ask the Speaker corner and interact with him. And of course, feel free to visit sponsor booth as well. Thank you.